Heretics, thanks for waiting. And today we're going to talk with the girl who left the cult and made herself a brain. Hello, Angel.
Hello.
So
Thanks
tell
for
us about
having
what
me.
cult did you escape from?
So I grew up in the Children of God, which is a apocalyptic like sex Christian cult. It was not a great cult, and I was born into it. And I left when I was 23 and went into the real world. But of course, we're not set up for the real world. And the way that my brain functioned was really bad. There was a lot of black and white thinking, a lot of circular reasoning, which is what happens when you're in these communities. But yeah, I left when I was 23 and I spent over a decade just trying to figure out how to get my brain set up properly and how to wire everything correctly because everything was miswired. So it was the process of deconstructing all of the mental processes and then rebuilding slowly from a base that was true and that I could really be proud of. So,
Yeah,
mhm,
deprogramming.
yeah,
Yeah, if you Michael Jackson, he was everyone see Michael Jackson as a weird person, but
yeah,
we see him as a brother that
mm,
never deprogrammed because basically
interesting.
everything he did
Yeah,
was what a Jehovah fish would do out of
right.
water.
Yeah. It's really true, and I think that is the main thing that was super surprising to me, was realizing that just because you're physically out doesn't mean anything. Yeah. Ooh, thank you very much. Um, but yeah, it doesn't mean anything to no longer be in that place. You actually have to go internal and fix your mindsets and your nervous system. And if you don't ever address your mindsets and your nervous system, then there's a pattern of behavior that continues. And it's very similar to what was happening when you were in the cult. It's either exactly the same or it's like the backlash. But yeah.
Can you give an example of a pattern of behavior that you
Yeah.
would have in the, what's it called, the church or?
Yeah, well, I call it a cult because it was definitely culty. Um,
Yeah,
but a pattern of behavior is the most common one that I see that people maintain is the us versus them. So when you're
yeah,
in the cult or you're in the community, there's a separation of like, we are called and chosen, they need to be rescued, or like, we're special, other people are, whatever it is. So there's the separation of us versus them. And then even after leaving the cult, there's a big ex-member community, and there's still that separation of us versus them. But this time it's thinking, oh, these people will never know what it's like to my struggle. People will never understand what it's like to like be me. People don't understand. And there's still the separation of us versus them. And I
mhm,
think healing is understanding that the human experience is very similar. We all have the capability to feel certain emotions or to experience things and have them enter our body in a certain way. But if you still have the us versus them, even if you hear something good or even if somebody offers something that's good, you won't take it in because it's from them and you still have that
mm.
separation. So that I think is the main one that I see.
Yeah, I think most of us, because you are the children of God,
Hmm.
while we are God's people. It's a big
Right.
difference. So, what
Yes,
did
very
you
big
call?
difference.
And we call everyone else for worldly because they are from
Hmm.
Satan's world. What did you
Yeah.
call the outsiders?
We called them systemites because they're part of the system.
Systemite. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. So it's so funny because it's like all these things are different, but the hierarchy is the same. The view of the outside world needs to be the same. They need to set up separation. They need to set up um, sort of the seeing of other people as less than, because then when you're leaving, you have to identify as less than. And nobody wants to do that. They want to be like special. Everyone wants to be special. And that's just a normal human thing. We want to feel important. But if you
Yeah.
label other people as like systemites or worldly, it's like, ew. So when you're leaving, you're like, oh, now I'm one of them. And you feel like it's an extra barrier that they put up in your brain.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you
Yeah.
guys
So,
have
so,
to
so when
do?
you say systemite, for me,
Uh-huh.
it sounds like absolutely ridiculous.
Oh,
But
totally.
I still go and refer to everyone I know as worldly.
Really?
Yeah, I
That's
can't.
so funny.
I kind of have deprogrammed a lot, but for me
Uh-huh.
personally, I can't. I, I can't understand that worldly people don't exist. That it's just something that exists in my head that
Mm.
I'm projecting to them that they are worldly.
Yeah, that's so funny. Yeah, because nobody else knows that they are systemites, and nobody else knows that they're worldly. It's
Yeah,
just like our view of it. Um, but once I started becoming more integrated with people in the world and everything, I started I did this a while ago. I started saying just systemite things. So, there was a hashtag a while ago going around of just girly things. And it would be like, cozy socks and a cup of tea, hashtag just girly things. And it was stuff like that. And so I would be like, oh, finding joy in life, like just systemite things, or like having friends who surround you and who are on your side, just systemite things. And I would
yeah,
put that on Facebook and people would see that and be upset. And I would be like, no, like the world is much better than I was taught that it was. And I want to be like, no, being a systemite, which I am now. I'm like, being a systemite is really great. Like, it's great to be worldly.
yeah. But because I kind of take it would be irrational to
Mm,
believe that it would be possible to remove all of the cult indoctrination.
yeah,
That would so sometimes I think it's kind of better to embrace it. And this is my crazy culture. It's
totally.
crazy, but it will be a part of me. So I can make fun of. So I call people worldly, and I explain to them why. And worldly people, the systemites,
Yeah,
when I tell them you're from the world of Satan, so that's why they love it. They think
yeah,
it's so much fun to be
yeah.
worldly.
And I think it's so important to be able to do that, to just like laugh at it because it's true. You can't take out everything. There's some stuff that's
No,
always there, but the ability to laugh at it because it on some level it's hilarious because it's so ridiculous that it just becomes funny. And if you can do that, then these things become lighter.
but how is to grow up in the children of God because they have
Mm.
you don't go from door to door preaching.
We do. So
You do?
the structure of it was that um during the week, we had to stay inside as kids. We all lived in a big commune. When I was growing up until I was 11, we lived in communes where there were like 40 to 100 people. And so we would all stay there. And then on the weekends, they would send the kids out and we would go door to door to sell videos or CDs of like music that we would make. Um, and then we would also like ask them to receive Jesus into their hearts and stuff like that. So we did the door to door, and we also did like singing and begging on the street. That was our main one, was just going to busy cities and intersections and just giving people a poster, like a pamphlet with like a picture of Jesus, or a picture of like shirtless Jesus, all ripped in heaven, surrounded by women, and then ask for money in return. Yeah, it
Hmm.
was really weird.
Yeah, God has a habit of being broke.
Yeah, for
You
real.
always need cash.
Yeah, I know. He doesn't provide as is promised. You have to go beg for it.
But okay, so Jesus, a ripped Jesus in heaven surrounded by women. It
Yeah.
sounds like Mormon Jesus kind of.
So the difference with this cult, because I feel like all the other fundamental Christian ones, they do like purity culture, right? They
Yeah.
do the like no sex, don't touch other people, don't touch yourself, God's watching you. Which for me, I'm like, first of all, if God's watching you in your private time, that seems to be a God thing that he needs to work out.
Yeah.
But with like seriously. Um, but with us, they said because that oh, thank you, David. With us, they said that God really likes sex. So that's why it was a Christian sex cult. The guy who started it was not a good guy. He was a very bad guy. And so his rhetoric was that kids love sex. And as soon as they're curious about it, you should let them explore sexually as adults. Like you should explore with them because if they if God didn't want kids to have sex, then they wouldn't be curious about it. So the whole thing was super like hypersexualized. So God was somebody in heaven that had a harem with a bunch of women, and whenever anyone would like, there's a documentary on Netflix that is called Children of God. And this one girl tells the story. They had a sister who was like 14 years old and she passed away. And the leader then had a dream that he was in heaven having sex with her. And he like put that into the literature and sent it out to everyone of like, don't worry, she's not really dead. She's in heaven having sex with Jesus. And that was like normal. So that was the vibe of it, was it was very like insidious and evil in that way. So it's like the same sort of fundamentalist Christian mindset, but then also this really perverse side of it.
Yeah, I heard that. Other than that, it
Mhm.
sounds very much like Jehovah Witnesses.
Yes.
No birthday, Christmas, stuff like that, and a big
No,
Armageddon,
we
and
had a big
afraid of
Armageddon.
outsiders.
Yeah, so it's like Armageddon, afraid of outsiders. We did have birthdays, but because we were in communes that were so big, a lot of times it would be like all the Aries would have a birthday, or like all the Geminis or all the Virgos. You would have like one evening during the month where everyone would like celebrate and then go. But once it went into smaller communes, you were allowed to have a birthday, but it's one of those things where like you can't have too much fun on your birthday. You can't draw too much attention to yourself. Like you can have a piece of cake, but like anyone who draws who draws attention to themselves is going to be punished. So even if you did have a birthday, you try and like tone it down a little bit. But we had Armageddon. We had this like super strict rules. We had the 2x2, which I think you guys have as well. The 2x2 rule, where like you always have to be with someone.
No, how does that work?
No, where you
Well,
always
when
have
we go from door to door, we go 2x2.
yeah.
And that has an effect, because if someone gives you a good argument, I start, for
Yeah.
against the Bible or something, then and I start doubting, the other one will
Yes.
correct me, so it's
Right.
like peer pressure.
Yeah. So
If you try
we
to
had
talk
that as
to
well.
Mormon boys, for instance, and you have a good argument, and you can see one
Yes.
of them start thinking, well, then the other one will step in.
Yeah.
So it is a way of controlling. But what do you mean?
Absolutely.
Did you have to be 2x2, like
Yes.
always?
Same always. Same thing. You're not allowed to go anywhere by yourself unless you're a top leader, then you can do whatever you want. But you were always either in the house, not allowed to leave the house. If you wanted to leave the house, you had to get permission. You had to say where you were going, and you would have to go 2x2.
That's extremely controlling.
Yeah. Yeah. And then we didn't have jobs. That's why all the kids had to go beg. And we were homeschooled, but we really weren't schooled at all. They stopped my schooling at 11 because they were like, you need to cook. So then they made me the chef for the commune. And I stopped my schooling at 11, but they only taught me math and English anyways, because they didn't want me to know anything past like really basic, because obviously if you get a hunger for knowledge, that's going to lead you out. So they gave you 2 subjects and that was it. But yeah, really like weird, crazy stuff. Very highly controlled.
It should not be legal.
Well, I don't think it is legal, but I think it's really hard to prove because, um,
Well, I don't
you
think
know,
anyone even tried,
well, they
because
did try.
children have. Well, not in
Right.
America. Actually, America is the only country that haven't signed the
Mm.
UN Convention on the Rights of a Child. But anyway, they have the right to an education. That's a human right
Yeah.
in the
But when
civilized world,
but
sorry
when
to
the
say.
authorities would come check, we would lie. So
Yeah, we would do that.
that's where it gets really tricky, because I went through a period of being like, why didn't anybody help me? Like, why didn't anyone say anything? And then I really thought about it and I was like, oh, because everyone was lying. And there were times that um, the the authorities raided the communes in Brazil. They raided the communes in the UK. They raided a couple of the communities that were part of the Children of God. But we as kids were taught to lie, obviously. And so when they asked us, like, do you have schooling? We say yes. And they ask you, do you want to be there? You say yes. They ask, does anyone hit you? No. Because what they did is they programmed us. I remember they were like, you have to say these are your answers to the questions they ask in case the authorities come. And if you answer incorrectly, you're never going to see your parents again.
Yeah, they did the same
And
to me.
so, yeah, and
Exactly the
so
same.
exactly. So of course, when the authorities have to believe you. So even if you have rights and they get you, and if you're afraid you're never going to see your family again as like an 8-year-old, you're going to lie your ass off. You're going to be like, yeah, I really love it there. Nobody hits me. I'm really well schooled, and there's
Yeah,
really no way
you
to
you
prove.
can ask follow-up questions, you know? If you go to the police
Yeah.
with a false alibi and you think it sounds really smart, they are professionals, so they will ask follow-up question, follow-up question,
Yeah.
follow-up question, and 5 or 10 questions in, your alibi breaks totally
But
that you're
I
lying.
think it's
So
I
why
think
didn't
it's
they
really,
do
really
that to us
difficult.
when we were kids? Ask the follow-up questions because
Yeah. I think it's honestly really difficult to prove because um if the adults and the kids are lying to you, then you actually really don't have proof. You can't pursue it because the kid is not pressing charges. The adults are lying and saying everything's fine. So where's your evidence? And for our cult, the courtroom, they did have a bunch of evidence. They had, because there were drawings that they would put out of like adults having sex with kids, and there was a bunch of literature surrounding that. And so they would bring this up in court. They would say, this is the environment that the kid is in, so we need to take the kid away. And the cult would just be like, no, we destroyed it. That's all incorrect. None of that exists any longer. And then they would send out, they called it a AHM, an all homes message. They would send out a message through email and be like, everyone needs to delete this, this, and this. We would have like burn parties where we would rip up the literature and burn it. But it doesn't matter if the literature is no longer there, the culture is still there. But it's inadmissible in court because then when the court says, okay, well, is this true? You can say, no, it's not, this doesn't exist. And it's true that it no longer exists because we burned it all. So then the court
hmm,
has to be like, well, okay, I guess it's no longer true that they're doing these things, so we have to give the kid back. And so the court of they took away kids from a lot of people around the world, and 100% of the cases they had to give the kids back.
hmm.
So I just think even if it is illegal, which it should really it should be illegal. I think the nature of it is mind control and people lying, and I think that it's really difficult to prove. And even this was something that I had to go through because even all these years later, I know that what happened. So I can say it with my full chest. I can say for a fact this happened, this is true. But if you ask me for proof or like, well, who abused you, when you were a kid, I only have Bible names. Everyone changed their name. So I can only say like, oh, it was a guy named Peter. And then it's like, well, what else? And I'm like, that's it. I don't know. And then they're like, well, where were you? How old were you? And it's like, are you going to believe a testimony that's 20 years old that really doesn't have anything? It just has a name that's a fake name. And so I had to really sit down and understand that like never in my life am I going to be able to pursue justice because it is something that is really difficult to prove through the court system, which I think is a whole other thing. Like I think that the justice system is great in some cases, and in cases like this, people completely get away with it. Like there is one dude out of everyone at its peak, this cult had 14,000 members. And so far, there is one man who has been convicted. One.
Yeah,
So,
because I'm even uncomfortable but from what I heard, they say like sex is great, sex is great, sex is great,
yeah,
love is great, and
right.
then they say like with no boundaries, like
With
grown
no
up and kids,
boundaries.
like that's a doctrine
Yes. Yeah.
that takes
And
it
so
to
you
a
end up,
very extreme
oh, it
level
takes
to
it
say
to a
that's our
really,
doctrine. We believe that
yes.
that kind of
And
stuff
then,
is.
and they would put it into action as well. And again, it's like they cause a very specific and very, very destructive wound that takes years to heal. So by the time it does heal, you kind of have no recourse to get justice in your life. And so it's a really sinister setup that they
But
did.
it's a huge failure from the government side when a group goes so far that they actually have
Yeah.
a doctrine
Yeah.
put in place
Yeah.
that we believe kiddie fiddling is okay. That's
Yeah.
our
And they would
doctrine, and
encourage
we
it.
live in a
That's their
commune, and the
doctrine.
kids are homeschooled,
Yeah.
and the government's okay with that. That's a
I don't
huge
think it's
failure.
I think I mean, for sure, I agree that it's a huge failure. But again, when the government comes in and says, "Is this what you're doing?" and everyone involved says no, then what?
No, but that's actually one of the things I'm lobbying for. That where everyone says,
Nice.
"Oh, well, the benefit of the doubt," and I say, Watchtower is not a human. Watchtower do not have human rights.
Yeah.
Kids have
Yeah.
human rights, and the benefit of the doubt should go to the kids. So when
I
you have a
agree.
group and you
Absolutely.
have a suspicion that
Mm.
kids have problem within this group,
Yeah.
then the benefit of the doubt should go to the kids, not
Yeah.
to a multi-billion-dollar organization,
Absolutely.
not to the leader of cult leader or anything.
Right.
Because if
Yeah.
there's a suspicion, the benefit of the doubt, they should always act on a suspicion and the benefit of the, and like a minimum thing they could say, okay, this group, you're not allowed
Yeah.
to homeschool.
Right. Oh, totally.
That
That was a huge failure, I agree, especially with that one, because what they did, and I think in the US it's just trash, but what they did is they let all the kids go back with no recourse, and actually the government then had apologized to the kids in some cases, and then a lot of the kids got a chunk of money from the government because that was the government apologizing for removing them from their home when they turned 18. So a lot of these kids, they turned 18, the government gave them money, and they immediately gave the money right back to the cult. So then it's like the government is funding the cult, like indirectly and not to their knowledge. But the whole thing was just set up totally incorrectly. And there was no follow up either. And I think that these government systems are so overwhelmed with people who are not properly trained, I will say. And I think a lot of these people have book knowledge, but it's different when you've gone through it and you've experienced it, then you know what to look for. And I think these people had book knowledge and they came in and they saw, and according to the book, it was fine. So we're going to leave it,
yeah,
and then that's it.
no, because they have this stupid idea that you have to prove something, and you
Yes.
don't have to prove something to protect a child.
Right.
If there's
Yeah.
a smoke coming up from a building, you can
Right.
take the
There's
kids
probably
out
fire.
without asking the
Yeah.
parents. If there's the neighbor's building is on, there's smoke coming up from the building, I run
Right.
out, take the kids, take them out, then I try to
Right.
locate the grown-ups. And
Yeah.
I might have to apologize and maybe stand trial for kidnapping or anything. But when
Right.
there's smoke, you protect the kids. And
And
that's
I
what they're not
think
doing.
that
They try to find
they're not.
evidence against
And
grown-ups,
I
which is
think
a
that
totally different
because
thing.
Yeah, and I think that because the government is such a big entity and they don't wanna get in trouble, they're willing to make the mistake that doesn't give them any backlash. They're willing for the kids to take the fall, you know?
Yeah.
So, like, if they get it wrong and the kids continue being abused, sucks to be them. But if they're wrong and then somebody can sue them, that's what they don't want. So they would rather, like, just continue to have, like, it be what it is. But this is something that, I really, because I spent a lot of time thinking about this, of what could have actually happened to prevent this or to stop this. So I would love to hear what you think could or should have happened in order to prevent this, because this is still going on in the world. There are still people who are doing this, and these places will continue to thrive because the nature of them is absolute obedience and lying to authorities when the authorities come around. But is there anything that you think can be like done in real time in this situation?
I believe in public schools. Because
Hmm.
in Sweden, I do even think Jehovah's Witnesses are not allowed to homeschool. And to tell people
Okay.
that groups like that you're not allowed to homeschool, well, they think it's persecution and all of that, but it's
Totally.
basically it's looking after the kids.
Yeah.
Because the most important, I went 11 years in school, and the most important lesson I learned was that worldly people were not trying to kill me.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's
That's a good one.
really sad that that's the
Yeah.
most important thing I learned. But I did learn it. Could you
That's
imagine
good.
me if I never learned it?
Right.
And you
Yeah.
have special school where Muslims go together, special school for
Yeah.
Pentecostals, special school. That creates a no
Mhm.
functioning democracy.
Yes,
In
I
a
agree.
democracy, public school where we all go together, rich and poor, and all kind of creeds and religion, and we learn to cooperate as kids, and we're no
Yeah.
longer afraid of each other. That is one of the keystones, I believe, like the minimum of protection of kids.
Yeah. I think that's a really smart move. I think the difference with the cult that I was in is that it was international, and places or countries that had that as law, they just wouldn't be there.
Hmm.
So that was the thing that I really was thinking about, like, is there anything that we can do to stop it? Because I saw it from the inside where they would just ban certain countries totally. They would just be like, everyone leave Australia. Or like everyone, no one go to this country. Everyone start going to this country. And they would tell their followers where to go so that they would be able to avoid things like that. So yes, for the macro health of that country, like in Sweden, for example, if legally you have to send your children to school, then they just wouldn't be in Sweden. And so Sweden is then great, and that's a good plan for Sweden. But then if you're a person in a cult, then you would just leave Sweden and then the cult would continue to thrive. So then maybe in Sweden there would be less cults because of that, and that's fantastic. But unless it carries out globally, it doesn't translate. And so that
Well,
was my
they changed that now.
that's
The right wing politicians, they
mm,
want everything to be private. So now they have a lot of
yeah.
special schools, and I'm not going to talk politics, but I think that's really
Yeah.
bad for kids to go to a Jesus school.
Totally.
Normally,
Totally.
these classes they are super good at evolution because they know that's
Mm,
one of the things that they will check. So they memorized all the things, but it's just they don't believe in evolution, but they know it better than
that's
anyone
wild.
else.
But I do have hope because I was able to get out of it and I was able to educate myself. So I really think that as long as we can like sneak people access to the internet is what brought a huge exodus from the cult that I was in because they were having an identity crisis. These people, I mean, every leadership of every cult anywhere ever is insecure. And that's always going to be their downfall because they want people like the people at the top always want people to think well of them. So if you they're so easy to control by just going to them and being like, oh, people don't think good of you, and then they're going to be like, what? They get super upset. So when the internet came out, the cult leaders wanted to be cool, so they were like, we're not a cult, we're cool, and so we're going to give people access to the internet because we're not a cult. We're like we're cool. So they gave people access to the internet, and then like bam, they went from 14,000 to like 2,000 because all the young people left, you know? So
Yeah.
and I think that these things will eventually eat themselves. And if anyone ever wants to have a good experience of life and they kind of see life outside, they will know that like you will have to leave in order to have a good experience. Because I think for me, I remember talking to people and seeing that they were joyful and being really confused because I was like, "How are you joyful? You're not one of the chosen ones." Like I didn't I was like, "How you're fake happiness because you're not a God follower, you know?" So I was like, "Your
I
joy
did
is a
exactly the
lie."
same
Right? It's
because my
it's
parents told
amazing
me that worldly people they're only smiling because
to
they know
hide
we're
the pain.
watching, and they are
Oh,
pretending to be as happy
really?
as Jehovah Witnesses.
Wow. That's
So
incredible.
and when I moved out here, I'm living
Yeah.
so well we kind of preach everywhere.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Well, half the globe, but so there's an isolated territory here, isolated
Okay.
in the eyes of Jehovah Witnesses. There's no congregation, nothing. So I thought that's where
Okay.
I'm going to preach.
Yeah.
So I moved out
You were
in the
like,
middle
great.
of nowhere, a beautiful area in Norway, a rural area,
Wow.
but with no witnesses.
Nice.
So in my mind,
Yeah.
this is a place where everyone is grumpy all the time. Because in my worldview, and I was a grown up, I was 21 years old, but I still thought
Right.
that the reason
Yeah.
why you find happy people, smiling people, is because that they know that there might be a Jehovah Witness around. So they're
Right.
putting on an act all the time. But now when I go to isolated territory where there never ever have been any Jehovah Witnesses really,
Right.
so I just went around corners like this, aha! Because I thought it would be a grumpy group of
Yeah.
people that, and it took me 5 minutes to realize that's not true.
Isn't that amazing though? Isn't that wild? Because you really truly believe, like, I would see other people being happy and I would be like, "Oh, this is what they warned me about. These are the fake people who live
Yeah.
fake lives and they're fake happy and they fake this and fake that." And then, having an interaction with them and being really confused, being like, "They're really nice. Like, it seems like they're nice. Like, interesting." And then being like, "Well, they're gonna show me the other side because they showed me the fake side, and now I'm gonna see the other side, and I'm gonna be disappointed." And the other side never shows up. Like, they're just good human beings.
Yeah.
And just I remember being like, "What? What?" And then I was like, "Well, then they must be Christians." And like, no, they weren't. And so it was just all these like new information entering my brain and my brain just being like, "Zzz," like cannot compute. But it's wild.
So, what made you leave?
So I left because I had a boyfriend at the time and we weren't allowed to be exclusive. So I kept on having to share him with other people, and that made me feel terrible. Thank you. And he wanted to go to college
When
and
you
you're
say
not
share him,
allowed.
what do you mean?
Oh, I had to let him have sex with whoever he wanted.
Ah,
So even though we were together, we weren't allowed to be exclusive because that would be selfish. And it went the same way for me, but I would tell people that, like, Jesus doesn't want us to have sex, because people would come up to me and be like, "Oh, Jesus wants us to have sex," and I would go pray about it and then come back and be like, "God said no. Sorry, like, I don't know what
oh,
to tell you." But is so you never I never felt safe. And so I was in my early 20s, and so everyone, like, was coming like, all these old men were coming out of the woodwork being like, "Oh, God said I'm allowed to have sex with you tonight." And I wanted to feel safe, and I felt safe with him. He said he wanted to marry me, and he was like, "I want to leave and then go to college, and I wanna marry you, and then it would just be us 2." And so that to me was really appealing. I felt love for him for sure, and I didn't know that anyone could love me so much to wanna just be with me, and the thought of being able to be somewhere else and just us and safe, I was like, "Oh my god, yes." And he wanted to go to college, and we are not allowed to get an education, so he would have to leave in order to go to college. So, he asked me to go with him and to marry him, and I said yes, and that's how we left.
oh, you're still together?
Mm-mm,
Okay.
divorced. Divorced, but both very happy about it and both really, like, I feel still a lot of love and respect for him, Um,
Yeah.
because it was such a crazy thing to have to go through. And after we left, I worked and I helped put him through school. And then, he helped me leave a cult. So we were like, when we were getting divorced, we were like, even trade.
It
So
was a win-win, I would say still.
absolutely. And I still like will communicate with him. And, I am really glad that his life is going well. And he's really glad that my life is going well.
I have
Yes, it is.
Ukraine on my face here.
Hmm.
So,
Looks good. A little
yeah.
contour.
Uh, so no, it's weird. America have free press, freedom of speech. You can
Hmm.
write in a newspaper. You can use the word war in Iraq, invasion of Iraq.
Yeah.
It's freedom. While in
Yeah.
Russia, they kill journalists.
Oh.
Putin killed journalists, and then we knew that. What's new that I was very surprised of is all my crazy American friends that
Yeah.
make memes and say, and they spread Putin's lie that we know are lie
Yes.
and say,
Yeah.
you never hear this in mainstream media.
Yeah.
So the free press in America is reduced
Yeah.
to mainstream systemite media,
Right.
while the Putin executes
Right.
journalists and doesn't
Right.
care that we know about it. And still,
Yeah.
some
Because
people
he
say
gets away with it.
that's really,
It's
really,
really
really,
crazy.
really.
I mean,
We're neighbor with
yeah.
Russia here.
Yeah.
And we have been practicing for all. I can just show you how militarized this country is that I actually have here. I should have prepared it. But I actually have my dog tags.
Oh,
And you know
wow.
how old I was when I got my Swedish dog tags?
How?
5 years old.
5?
Yeah,
Why?
I'm Swedish, not Norwegian.
Why 5
Like the
though?
whole
That's
country,
so young.
a war, Soviet against Sweden or Finland, it would be a
Wow.
guerrilla war.
Oh.
Like we had during the Cold War, the Swedish army that could mobilize in a few weeks were 700,000 men.
Wow.
We had the fourth biggest army in the world when you count
Wow.
that way. So we can very much relate to what they're doing in the Ukraine,
Yeah.
because that's what we were planning here.
Interesting.
A militia army fighting
Yeah.
in our own backyards. If you go
Yeah.
around, when I was a kid, we're out in field service knocking at doors. I would look around and we'll find foxholes digged, everyone ready.
Oh my
And like I
God.
said, I should find my dog tags here, but there. I
That
actually have
sounds
my
very
dog tags that I
stressful.
got when I was 5 years old.
Really?
So
That's incredible
we've been
to me.
planning for all kind of scenarios, but there was one thing that we never planned for. It was that America would be split in two parties, that one support Putin against
Right.
democracy. That was unexpected, to put it mildly.
Really? I think that there's
And referred
always
to
like
the free press as mainstream worldly systemite media instead of
I mean,
Putin's propaganda. So
it's
I'm a
so
little bit disappointed with some
my
of you
gosh.
guys.
Oh, absolutely. I've been disappointed as well. But I will say that all the people who are like that generally will have religious backgrounds with religious dogmatic thinking and black and white thinking. And that's generally the commonality of the people who are very, very conservative, right wing. They generally will be the people to spread that sort of information. In my experience, that has been what I've found. And a lot of people who, oh my God, you found them. Since you were 5, huh? That's so crazy.
I remember when I
still
got
fit.
this, they would hang all the way down to my knees almost when I got it.
Wow, that's wild. I cannot believe that.
So many, like Finland had a guerrilla war. Finland
Okay.
was alone against Soviet and managed to stay. And I have a lot of friends people telling me about the war between Soviet and Finland. It was really brutal. It was guerrilla. That's the Molotov cocktail was. They were crawling in the snow, throwing Molotov cocktails on tanks. It was a really brutal bayonet war in all of Finland. And basically that was what we're prepared for in Sweden, and that's what they're doing now in the Ukraine.
Yeah.
Basically, the only thing to do is if they let them into the country and then fight from street to street.
That's so
It's
terrible.
not fun.
That's not good
in any way.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of friends.
Bummer.
Most people in Europe know people from Ukraine. I dated 2 women from Ukraine. Both of them were Russian.
Interesting.
They identify as Russian. They speak Russian, but they have Ukrainian citizenship. None of them claim to be persecuted.
Right.
Like the Putin propaganda that Americans believe in. If
Yeah.
you live in America, you identify as Latino and you speak Spanish at home, doesn't mean you're persecuted, and
Right.
doesn't mean that Mexico have the right to intervene with their
Right.
military.
Absolutely.
So
It's a
no,
really interesting. Yeah.
yeah, it's a terrible story because
Yeah.
if Ukraine, if if Putin get to take Ukraine
Yeah.
because he's a cult leader and he feels big, if he starts to take Finland, well, then I would be in war with Putin.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
this is a very personal thing, and it's not
Yeah,
fun.
absolutely. No, that's yeah, highly, highly stressful for sure.
Yeah. Anyway, so you
I know.
left.
How do we segue?
Yeah, it's not a nice segue. It's not a fun story.
But
But like
sometimes life is not a
all this
fun
Putin
story. Yeah.
propaganda that 50% of Americans believe in,
Mm.
no one believes in it in Europe. Putin is not even
Yeah.
trying to selling it here because most
Yeah.
of us know people in the Ukraine.
Mm.
If it would be like Putin would lying about people from Minnesota in America, no one
Right.
would believe it.
No one would care. Yeah.
But we might believe it here.
Right. That's
So
fair.
no, it's a terrible story. Anyway,
Yeah.
so how did it happen leaving? You got an education, you get job. How did you?
So I still haven't been to school, but I have self-educated, read a lot of books, done a lot of research about the things that I've been interested in. Um, so he left, he went to college. I started working right away as a nanny. And then I started teaching yoga. And during that whole time, he was going to school. Um, but yeah, so we just lived like hand to mouth. We got an apartment. We borrowed money from my mom, who had been thrown out of the cult earlier. And so
Oh,
she lent us $3,000. So we put deposit and first month's rent. And then it was just like, then we just had to make money. So he worked as a night security guard and I worked as a nanny, and we just lived month to month, just like trying to get by. We had our budget was like $100 for the month for food for both of us. So we ate a lot of like rice and beans, a lot of ramen. Um, and yeah, we just survived for the first like 2 or 3 years. And then after the first 2 or 3 years was when I started being like, okay, what was that? You know? And then that was also, I had been in the world long enough to see that people in the world were good. So I started to feel comfortable trying to talk to people, trying to learn and trying to share my story a little bit. And I remember the first time I shared it, I was like shaking and like feverish, and I was like super stunted to get the words out. And then the next day I was like, everyone's going to shun me. Nobody's going to talk to me anymore. I had shared it at my yoga training. And that was, how many years was that? I left in 2008, 9, 10, 11. So almost 4 years later was the first time I shared the story. And I was worried. I like went home and I was like I slept super bad, tons of anxiety, went in the next day and everyone was like, "Hey." And I was like, "That's it?" Like there's no
no stoning.
backlash. Yeah, exactly. I was like, "No one is shunning me." No one, and then a couple of girls came up to me afterwards and were like, "Thank you for sharing that. That was a lot. And I hope that you know that like we really admire you." And I was like, because I was told, as I'm sure you were told, that like when you leave, everyone's going to hate you. And so you can never talk about where you came from because people will hate you and you're going to be their enemy. And when I realized that, like, actually, people like are not, and people are actually supportive of me, then I started just telling it because it was easier because it's so difficult to keep the lies straight because people would be like, "Where'd you go to school? How did you move here? You're not from here. Where are you from?" Things like that that everyone would know. And I was also at the age, I was 23. So in American life, that means I was just out of college. Like I would just be finished with college. So it was a super common question of like, where'd you go to college? Where'd you go to high school? And my options were to like lie and then try and keep them straight, or just to be like, oh, I didn't. And what I learned to do was to steer conversation, or I would say, "Oh, I went like to college overseas, but what about you? Where did you go to college?" and just like flip it so that they would start talking about themselves, because I was always trying to like steer away from questions about me. And then once I realized I could tell the truth and no one would react like crazily, then I was just like, oh my God, what a great like relief that I can just speak the truth and nothing bad will happen. And so
Mm.
once I figured that out, I was like, oh, great. And it's been wonderful since.
And we don't have we are told that worldly people are not true friends. You can't find true
Mm,
friendship, all of that.
yeah,
But
same.
they focus on that if you leave, being disfellowshipped is the worst, terrible,
Yeah.
but being an apostate is worse.
Oh, yeah. Oh my
If you
gosh.
say something negative about the
Oh, yeah.
organization, that's the so when I meet ex Jehovah Witnesses,
Yeah.
many of them talk like this. I've been disfellowshipped for 5 years, but I would never say anything negative about the
Yeah.
organization because it's so engraved in
It's
them
so ingrained.
that
Yeah.
and they can come up to me and be, if they accept the self-loathing that I'm a terrible person and I
Yes.
deserve to die because I'm not,
Yes.
but I'm better than you
Yeah.
because you're an apostate.
Yes.
And
Um,
it's a huge thing for them if you leave, that you never say anything. And that must be difficult. I never been that kind of guy, but imagine if
and
like you say, I'm
yeah.
from a cult, but it's a wonderful cult and everything was
Yeah.
great.
But it was a great one. It was a great one. Um, um, for me, I mean, leaving, you were the same thing, like you're not allowed to talk to your family, you're not allowed to do this or that, and everyone is gonna shun you. Um, but it was interesting for me because with that mindset that you just described, that was a really interesting one because people would leave, but they still had the us versus them. And then also with these sort of cults, the thing that they thrive on is a superiority complex, right?
Hmm.
Like that's there's no barrier to entry and you immediately get to feel superior. So people love feeling superior. So they get to keep that mindset. And then when they interact with you, it's like, yes, yes, I'm out, but I'm still better than you. And they get to keep the superiority piece. They don't have to deconstruct that. They keep it with them, which is
Hmm.
a really, so I think that's another mindset that like it's the same. It's just in a different context, but it's the same mindset. Um, but when I left, I did the same thing where I was like, I still am super thankful about how I grew up. It was still like I'm trained really well. I know how to be a good wife. I know how to like hold my tongue. Um, and then about 4 years after I had left, I wrote an article that was talking about how like I finally acknowledged that I grew up in a cult and I have a lot of self-hatred for that. But I also just realized that it's not my fault.
No.
And I need to forgive myself for thinking that I bear the responsibility for all these things because I don't. And immediately, a big leader in the cult reached out to my husband because we were still married at the time. He wrote my husband and said, she's going to ruin her whole life because of this. And like, she needs to stop talking right now because it's going to ruin her career. People are going to think that she is, a victim. It looks bad for her. Nobody's going to hire her, all this stuff. So he did it for out of concern for me. I should stop talking bad about the cult. And that was his angle. So of course he didn't write me. He wrote my husband because my
Of
husband is
course.
supposed to tell me what to do. So he wrote my husband and was like, tell her to stop this because this is detrimental to her and we're concerned for her. Even though she's an enemy now, we're still so good that we're still concerned for her, that we're concerned that her writing about us is ruining her life. And so he shared that with me and I was just like, yeah, no. I disagree. I was like, I don't think it'll ruin my life. I think I'm okay.
So are they shunning you when you leave?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. But
Yeah.
obviously the leaders can reach out if they think it's
Well, the leaders are the
okay.
exception to everything,
Yeah.
you know?
It's like
That's the
Jehovah
thing.
Witness elders. They're allowed to
Yeah,
talk to us,
exactly.
but they're not supposed. Actually, when you're an apostate, they're not supposed to because we're like poison.
Yes.
They actually say that we have a mental disease that's transferable.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Wow. We had we called them detractors. and then we also gave them a demon. So it was called the Vandari. So the Vandari, same thing, they can latch from one to the other. So then if I am next to you and you're a detractor, you have the Vandari and
Can I
it can
have your
transfer to
Vandari?
me. Yes, you can.
What's his
So they
name?
would just, oh, I don't have a name for it. But the demons of all the backsliders were called the Vandari. So then some ex-members, after they left, they made t-shirts like I'm a Vandari, like things like
How do
that,
you
which is
spell
really
it?
funny. Vandari.
Vandari.
Mhm.
Okay, I'm gonna.
Do it.
I
Do
could
it.
call him Vladimir after Putin, but that would be rude to
That's true.
demons in general, so
That's
I'm not
true.
gonna do that.
That's very true. That's so funny. Oh my God.
So you
But
get a
yeah, so
demon.
you
But
get a
what happened,
demon.
so there will be Armageddon, and I die in Armageddon because I'm a systemite, I guess?
So everybody dies. Everybody dies.
Everyone.
Everyone dies.
Oh.
Nobody lives. But we will probably get a good death, and we immediately, like, some of us are spared death and we're immediately raptured. If we can make it through Armageddon, then we just get raptured at the end. And then the ones of us who die, we die great. But then when you get to heaven, you're like part of God's elite.
Oh.
Yeah,
And when they say elite,
that
it's
was the
like
promise.
dun, dun. It's
Yeah,
sexy
I
heaven.
mean, well, it's just you're like God's right hand. You're God's like close army. So there's Jesus, and then the archangels, and then us.
Ah.
So we're like God's elite, And again, it's a superiority. And you're like, yeah, we're God's elite. What are you doing?
Yeah. Yeah, I remember when I moved out here and I was walking around praying to Jehovah. It was kind of fun, but
Mhm.
I literally felt that I was the most important person
Yeah.
in the area because I was there to save them.
Mm.
And then I also realized, since I was the first Jehovah's Witness in this area, that also meant I was the most important person in history.
Right, obviously.
And I wasn't comfortable with that thought. It didn't sit well with me. I'm not that
Ah,
kind of
funny.
narcissist. I'm book
Right.
smart. So this is Adam and Eve. They ate an apple, and then God drowned
Yeah,
everyone, and the dinosaurs, and then Jesus, and then 6,000 years later, me.
that's right.
And since I was the first and the only Jehovah Witness, I was
Yeah.
the most important person on the whole peninsula in the history of mankind. And I
Wow.
did not like that.
Yeah.
It didn't feel good.
Too much pressure.
Some people would like it.
Totally. Oh, it would feed right into so many people of just like, yes, I am. But it's good that you felt uncomfortable.
Yeah. And I remember I was sitting there thinking, how would the world look if Armageddon come now? And I realized,
Yeah.
okay, everyone would be killed except me. How would that make anything better?
You're like, and then I have to take care of everything because I'm the only
Yeah.
one alive here.
Okay, so
So
what would
what
happen with me then in Armageddon? I would die. Do I go to
you
hell?
would die. No, you wouldn't go to hell, but you would have to get saved once you went to heaven because you got it wrong. We got it right. We're the only ones who have it right. All the other churches have it wrong.
Okay.
Yeah. What were you guys taught about other churches?
Well, you're false religion.
Yeah.
So you're a worldly person, but you're more like a
Okay.
member of false religion.
I see.
And false religion ceased to exist in 1914, actually, but they still lingers on. But the water has disappeared, they say. And then we, as Jehovah Witnesses, we survive Armageddon if you're good enough.
Okay.
Yeah, and we survive as a group. So if there's a
Okay.
congregation, then Jesus sent out an angel to protect the congregation while he killed
Okay.
everyone else. And this is the big
Oh.
stress moment, because if one person in that group commits a serious sin that the elders don't find, God will kill all of them.
That's right.
And that's very
Mhm.
stressful when you actually believe it, because the elders need to
Yes.
control everything. And I remember my
Yes.
father were focused on that. So if there were,
Wow.
he asked me to look at other kids in the shower
Yeah.
if one of them were masturbating, so I could report it to the elders, because if we allow these things to happen
Oh my god.
without even trying to control it,
Right. Then everybody dies.
yeah, like literally God gonna
Wow.
kill 80 faithful Jehovah Witnesses because a
Jesus.
12-year-old
Was
masturbated.
masturbating.
So
They
that's a
always
lot of
they
pressure. So
always turn it into something like that, where it's something so perverse. When you really break it down, it's something that is so perverted. And in order to go to heaven, you need to have your son watch other people in the shower. Like, what?
yeah.
But it always degrades into something like so like horrendous like that. And they don't see a problem with that. It's wild.
Yeah, and it's bullying. It was a particular kid. That's what we
Oh,
call bad association. If there's someone
mm.
in the group that don't give enough to Watchtower,
Uh-huh.
give enough time, and then they're a bad association. And if the
Mhm.
parents are bad association, the kids are not
Mhm.
trustworthy. So it was a kid of parents who were bad association.
Wow.
So basically, we were bullying a kid my age
Yeah. Oh,
because the elders asked us to.
that's so crazy.
So, but we go to paradise, and you get to pet
Yeah.
panda, and you get to walk around in your national costume. So, if you're Norwegian, you can dress as a
Really?
Norwegian forever and ever, and play with a pet panda, and you can teach him
Oh
tricks.
my
And a few
gosh.
years later, he dies, and you get a new pet panda, and you can teach him new tricks.
Okay. Okay. So when we got to heaven, we got new bodies, we got see-through clothes, and we got a crown with stars on it. And the better we were, the more stars on our crown we would have.
That makes sense.
So if you were like doing the dishes, you would do it and be like, I'm getting a star on my crown. Or they would be like, who wants stars in their crown? Because like somebody needs to go clean the toilet. And you're doing it for extra stars in your crown.
Oh,
Hmm.
that's smart.
Yeah, it is.
It's
It's like,
interesting how stupid
it's
people are.
relentlessly.
We call it
Right.
privilege. They say, "Sister, would you like a privilege?"
Nice.
And that means you can
Yeah.
clean the toilet.
Right. And then we also had something called a sacrificial date, and it was basically coercing people into having sex with you, and you had to do it because it was making a sacrifice for God. And if you did it, then you would get extra stars in your crown, and you'd be good for God. God would be happy with you if you were able to have sex with somebody that you really just found repulsive. You would do it for extra stars in your crown, and that was their like pressure system.
Hmm. Yeah.
Not great.
Well, I think I still have some, I don't know what do you call it? What did we call it? You get treasures in the sky. What do you say? Treasures
Treasures
in
in
heaven?
heaven.
Treasures
Treasures in
in
heaven.
heaven,
Yeah.
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 I have a shitload of treasures in heaven. And if someone
I
wants to
love
buy
it.
them, you're more than welcome.
Yeah. Mhm.
I'll even
It's
take room.
70. Yes, okay, cool. It'll be a lot, but yeah. I'm happy to sell stars on my crown as well. It's $17,000 per star. Starting price.
Oh, it's so crazy. So what's your because you have a channel now, what's your passion?
So my passion is helping people to understand that you have everything you need inside of you, and if you ask yourself the right questions, you can grow your own wisdom,
Yeah.
because the body and the mind both get better the more you use them. And so, if you have never done exercise before in your life, you're going to be a weak person. That's not because you're a weak person, it's because you've never exercised. And when you start using your muscles, they will start to grow. And the more you use them, the more like functional of a human being you're going to be. And it's the same thing with the mind. If you have never been able to create your own thoughts before or ask any questions, you will have a weak mind. Not because that's the nature of your mind, but because you've never used it. And so my biggest thing is teaching people how to ask themselves questions and learn to be their own source. And so I have like courses and I have like a website coming out where I teach people how to have like just algorithms of thought where you ask this question and you let it take you into another one, you let it take you into another one, and you will end with resource. And it's like, what did you learn from asking yourself all these questions? Write that down. And then you just end up having a bunch of new thoughts that belong to you. You know where they came from. You've talked yourself through it. And so you just end up with a lot of personal resource that comes from you, stuff that you have vetted, and always with the understanding that you're trying to take in more information, because new information will help inform the old information. And you can change your mind because your mind is not static. Everything is always evolving. And the more you
Hmm.
understand that, and the more you just kind of look towards the truth, and your feelings play into that, your feelings are also true. And the more you can take yourself into consideration, answer your own questions, ask your own questions, look for information, as much information as possible for your answers, all with the understanding that you're constantly evolving, then you'll be able to pull yourself out of whatever it is that you started in, you know, because I didn't start like this for sure. I wouldn't speak for a long time, and I wouldn't talk to other people, and I wouldn't look up things, and I just felt like I was a completely useless person, and the only thing that I knew how to do was, like, physically serve others. So I could clean, I could nanny, and that was it, and that was going to be 100% of my life until I realized that I could create my own thoughts, and then I thought,
Yeah.
"Well, if I can create my own thoughts, let me find a really strong base to base them off of," and the base, of course, is truth. And so when I have a thought or I want to think of a principle, I take the thought and I pull it to the right and the left and try and find its breaking point. And my easiest example is like water. Water is healthy. That's a true statement. And its only breaking point is like when you're drowning. So water is good for you. That's a universally true statement. The only way that it breaks is like if you're drowning, then water is not good for you if you're underwater.
Yeah.
Um, but I can say that. So then it was like, okay, when I have a mental thought, then can I think that all people deserve human rights? How far can I pull that? And I can pull that really far, and it's always true. So that's something that, okay, now when I think of people, I can take them into consideration with the understanding that we all deserve human rights, you know? So it like it starts to build a template for the way that I view the world. So that is the thing that I'm really passionate about, and the thing that I'm really passionate about sharing as well with other people.
Hmm.
What
Yeah.
about you?
No, human rights and all of that, because
Yeah,
this is my sales pitch. I do it all the time. Politicians don't know how it is to grow up in a cult. I
they
do.
don't. Yeah,
I
very
someone
true.
had, and I say that's why you have to listen to me, because I paid a high price to be here,
Yeah,
and that's a
right.
very good. Feel free to steal it, those of you that actually speak to politicians, because they listen when you start that way.
Yeah, that's a
Because
really good
you don't
opener.
belittle them,
Yeah,
but it's intriguing, and actually everyone likes cult member.
it's true. It's weird.
People find it interesting,
They
and
really do.
a young Pimo from Sweden called me and said he found out not only that worldly women enjoys, because we have the purity, so
Right.
we don't talk about sex or make love, we talk about commit
Mm.
love,
The language
commit
is
sex,
different.
commit
Interesting.
it's a bad thing, it's a shame thing, and a
Interesting.
lot of Jehovah Witness male, when they leave, they struggle with
Yes, with purity
impotence
culture.
for the first
Absolutely.
year, because
Absolutely.
the
I
guilt and the
understand that.
shame.
Yeah.
But was a people called me and said, you know what I found out? Worldly women don't think it's a crime, they actually enjoy it.
Ah, that's funny. I love that.
Ah. It's not a crime.
Yeah, who knew?
No, they really mess with our mind,
They do.
and I still have to walk around reminding myself that there's no war going on, but now there is a war going on.
But now there is. Yeah.
But I was trained to
Yeah.
believe that worldly people wanted to kill me,
Right.
that they were
And
torture
they
chamber
don't.
in school,
Oof.
and my father put my hand in a vice,
Oh,
and
that's
you're showing
terrible.
with the saw how they would cut off my fingers,
Eesh. That's so terrible.
and that kind of difficult to
Not
get
great.
out of your head and find,
It is. It's very, very difficult to get out. Yeah.
So
interesting.
what would be
It's
your
an
tips
interesting
for
life
me
journey.
to get it out of my head?
So my tip for you is
Yeah.
to go into it, really think about it, and really think about like spend because I think when we have these thoughts, our tendency is to avoid them, right?
Yeah.
Like I was always taught since I was like 5 years old that the Antichrist soldiers were going to find me and they were going to gang rape me. So ever since I was 5, that was my fear. And I was talking to my therapist about it, and he was like, well, let's really think about it. Let's deconstruct this fear. When you were, you've had this fear for such a long time. So let's really think about, have you ever been in that situation where that has been even a little bit remotely true? Has there been anything that has happened where that's even a little bit been true? Ever? Have I ever been that close? Have you ever found yourself being close to a situation where you would be held in a torture chamber?
Me?
Yeah.
No, not more than my parents. Well, they we had a crafts thing in
Yeah.
school where we learned
Hmm.
crafts, woodwork, and my father said they would use that as a torture chamber.
Yeah. But
So
like
I've been
other
there.
than the initial, because for me, we had comic books about it and we had the constant threats about it, right? But actually, in the last 30 years of your life, have you actually been close to being held in a torture chamber?
No.
So then it takes it into, okay, so now we know that this wound is just in the mind because in the external world it's never going to happen, right? Like that's not a worry that you need to have because if you look at the evidence of your life, it has never existed, nor will it ever exist for you. So you can now, when that thought comes up, you can now respond to that thought by reminding it that it doesn't need to exist. It's not a true thing and it doesn't need to be in your brain. So it's like uh, a more recent part of you talking to an old part of you, because the old part of you always is like, we're afraid of this, we're afraid of this, we're afraid of this. And it's bringing in the you that's present now with the evidence that you have of your life now and being like, yes, fear, I see you, but remember, look at the evidence of our life. This is never going to happen, and
Hmm.
this is not something that we still need to be afraid of. And so it's learning to speak to yourself, because there's a part of you that was created very young, and that's the part of you that is really scared and always trying to keep you safe. And there is now an adult version of you, and you need to speak to that other part of you really lovingly and remind it, this fear doesn't need to exist. Remember, this is not going to happen. So it's almost like the adult version of you talking to the child version of you, reminding you that like we don't need to have this thought, because if you look at the evidence of our life, this has never happened, nor will it ever. So like, thank you for trying to keep me safe all of these years, but we don't need this any longer.
Hmm.
And initially, that has to be a really long sort of conversation in your head. But afterwards, it does become easier, because then when the thought comes up, you're like, nope, we already had this discussion. And that thought starts to die off because the neurons get the message that they're not going to be able to fire, because there's now a blockage in the road every time it tries to fire. And then eventually it realizes, okay, this blockage is there, so I'm just not going to fire. And
Yeah.
eventually it really fires a lot less, because again, if you stop using it, it'll get weaker.
Yeah, I actually had a breakthrough. Okay, so I'm feeling
Hmm.
great. I'm not afraid of torture, but
Good.
it's a huge block on all relationship with worldly people.
Yes.
When there's like a
Yeah.
huge part of my brain that says that I have to smile to people, be nice
Mm.
to people, be honest to people, and I don't lie, I'm a man of my word, of all of that.
Yeah.
So really, people should like me, but they don't. Kind of, I assume they don't, and I
Oh,
have always my guard up
yeah.
because it's this.
But again, I'm going to ask you to look at the evidence over the last however many years. Do people like you?
Yeah,
Yeah.
they would probably like me better if I would let my guard down and
But
be
that's the thing,
vulnerable.
is
But
like
I
there's
can't be
the
vulnerable
old,
among worldly people. That's my
well,
problem. But
that's the old part of you is trying to keep you safe, right?
yeah, of course.
Yeah. So, but then there's this new part of you that if you look at the evidence of the last couple of years of your life, everyone is friendly to you and people like
Yeah.
it when you're vulnerable. So then it's the ability to take in new information from your real life versus the thing that you were taught to be afraid of, which actually isn't true if you really look at it.
Hmm. Yeah, I had a breakthrough for. I told my wife, and she said, like, Of course, I told you a billion times. I went down and told her, worldly people don't exist.
What?
Yeah, you know, systemites don't exist.
Yeah. Right.
It's like, it's just a name we put on a bunch of
Yeah, it's
people
just a
that can,
label.
you know, it's just a label that exists in my head. And I had it clearly like
Yeah.
just realized they don't exist. But
That's
I'm still
funny.
struggling with understanding that
Yeah,
worldly people don't exist.
that's so funny. It's one of those things that it does take a long time to walk out, but there absolutely is a way to get out of it, and I think that you're doing it, just because all of everything is not undone yet, doesn't mean that you are not making active progress, like,
Yeah.
consistently, you know? And so I think if you really look back whenever I feel low about myself, I think about myself, 4 years ago, 6 years ago, 12 years ago, and I'm like, "Oof, that's a hell of an arc." And the trajectory of
Yeah.
my life was this, and it just went and then it just went straight up. So whenever I'm having a low moment, I think about being like back over here, and I'm like, nah, I'm good. I just got to keep going.
Yeah. But you said in the video, did you join a new cult after you left the first cult?
No, 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 no. So that was a work environment that was set up exactly like a cult, where there was like
Oh,
the social media or whatever, the like celebrity personality. And he had a group around him of people who worked for him, and I was one of the people that worked for him. And I immediately recognized the power structure. And that was something that I had said. I was like, this power structure is actually incredibly similar to like a cult. And they were like, don't worry, it's not. And I was like, okay. And then it turned out to be like almost exactly the same. So that was a really interesting double experience there, but survived that one as well. So still on the
yeah.
up and up. But yeah,
No, it's fascinating.
it is.
It's fascinating, but you know, there's so much thing that the government really failed us as kids. There's a
Yes.
lot of stuff they could have done. Just ask the follow-up question. You ask kids,
Mm,
do your parents beat you? I remember because we were trained to say this that we call it theocratical warfare. It's like you say something that's technically true but actually a
right.
lie.
Yes.
And so people would say, is it true that Jehovah Witnesses beat their kids? And my father would always put, why you ask me? Ask my son. And
Yeah.
I would respond, quote, when the Bible says the
Mm,
rod, it can be interpreted like a scepter of righteousness.
right.
Yeah.
Totally. So
When
you
a
have the
6-year-old
override.
used the word scepter of righteousness,
Ask a follow-up question.
yeah,
Yeah, for
do
sure.
your parents beat you? And the kids say, when the Bible said the rod, it can be interpreted as a scepter of
Right.
righteousness. How difficult would it be to ask a follow-up question?
Right. That's so crazy.
So
Yeah.
there's a job to do.
There's there's a lot of jobs to do. Ooh, my battery is almost 5%.
Running out of battery. Okay.
Yeah.
So no, it's late in Norway and I've been working all day and the person gonna pick me up was late. So sorry about that. Thanks for the
No,
super
no,
chat
you're
and
good.
everything. So this is actually disassociation. You know, you can't leave Jehovah Witnesses without being shunned. So it's a cool thing to
Mhm.
disassociate. But how do you disassociate someone that's from the children of God? Do they have
You
a
just
public?
no, they just leave and you don't speak to them and you don't speak
They don't
about them.
announce it,
No, I mean, they denounce you, and but, like, there's no, like, ceremony,
but
You just leave one
there's
day.
no announcement at the meeting or
No,
something
there
like.
is. There
How
is.
do they say it?
They just say so and so has decided to leave. That's it.
Okay,
Yeah,
so and so decided. That was boring.
yeah. I
With
know.
us, they say a name of person. My name is Per Jonas Skogtroll. Is no longer one of Jehovah Witnesses, and
Wow.
that's it. Doesn't matter if you raped a child or if you
Yeesh.
celebrated Christmas. The
It's
announcement is the
yeah.
same,
Wow. That's
and also if you
insane.
just decide to leave, you say, "I don't
Yeah,
believe this anymore. I haven't done anything wrong. Please leave me alone."
yeah.
The announcement is the same.
That's so crazy.
So that's why disassociation is a big thing for us. Okay, so now
Yeah.
we'll come up with a better disassociation for you. We could say, Angel DeSantis is now a systemite.
Great. Thank you. We did it.
Yeah. So if there's anyone who has a good name for my Vendare,
yes.
please let me
We'll
know in
come
the
up with
description.
one.
And if someone wants to disassociate on my channel, please contact me on Facebook and we do that. So
I love it.
thank you, Angel. And what's the name of
Thank you
your
so much.
channel?
It's my name. It's Angel DeSantis, and I have a website coming soon called The Process by Angel, and I'm going to teach thought algorithms on there. So it'll be exciting.
And let me know in the description if you want Angel to be here more times.
Yes.
So
all right.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and see you
Appreciate
in
it.
paradise. Now good luck's going
We'll
to
see
bed.
you in paradise. Bye.